I recently tested the latency of CS2 and compared it to CSGO, and the results were obvious. CS2 has a lot more latency. But while testing, I scoured the internet for a better build of CS2, as a new EQB hacked to run servers at 128 ticks. One of the reasons I wanted to do that is because people keep saying 128 ticks on CS2 feels very good, and I wanted to test that. But after a few days I couldn't find a build, so I made the video as is and kinda gave up. Or did I? It just bothered me too much, and I had to have answers. Did CS2 truly feel better at 128 ticks? Sub-tick is a good idea after all. Maybe the higher tick rates will really fix everything. And so after hours of searching, probably getting on an FBA list or two, and probably getting a dozen Russian spyware, I have done it. I ran CS2 at 128 ticks. So this time around I dropped the testing on a local map as it's pretty useless. I rerun my tests on my server, hosted on a different PC on the same network with a ping of around 5. Since this daily scales with ping, this is the absolute best scenario, and you will 100% have more latency than this, although I can't tell how much. Starting on a local server, the latency of CS2 is of about 18 frames or 75 milliseconds. This is the exact same as last time, so no surprises here. It also proves that my testing is consistent and at least semi-correct. Against this, I wanted to compare the illegal version of CS2 at 128 ticks, and this is where I realized I'd gone through all of these for disappointing results. The latency was of about 25 frames on average, with about 104 milliseconds. The beta, or at least the version I found, has a pretty big latency problem. I still want and finish my testing, as there could still be an interesting difference. And there was a difference, but nothing that would actually fix the game. Moving on, testing with actual latency, illegal CS2 had a delay of about 45 frames or 187 milliseconds. At 128 ticks, the delay goes down to 39 frames or 162 milliseconds. For reference, the current CS2 version has a delay of 32 frames, which is better than the beta at 128, but worse than CSGO. Yes, even 64 ticks CSGO. A scrapped idea for the previous video was testing CSGO at 64 ticks as well as 128. Initial numbers showed little difference to 128 ticks, so I just focused on 128. I compared both games at their best, but if 64 ticks is still better, it could point out a problem with CS2. As I released the video, I then got comments like this. You had a 128 ticks server running for CSGO, which will lead to obvious advantages. You should try this test with 64 ticks CSGO and see if the latency is similar.
Oh no! CSGO at 128 is faster! Oh my god, the horrors!
Oh, by the way, my answer wasn't half sarcasm. I actually did that. Anyway, people were actually curious about the difference between CSGO at 64 ticks and CS2, and one of them was just an asshole. So I did those tests. Before getting to the numbers though, I have to mention that the previous video is inaccurate. The difference between CS2 and CSGO is actually not the same as what I showed. One of the games had an advantage over the other due to an issue that I finally figured out during this testing. Yes, CSGO actually had even less latency than shown, about 2 frames on average, or about 8 milliseconds. After the release of CS2, CSGO's executable moved and full screen optimizations got turned back on, adding between 2 and 4 frames on average. So in the previous video, you can take about 2 frames or 8 milliseconds of delay away from the CSGO numbers. CS2 was correct though. Anyway, I redid my tests since 4G isn't the most stable and ping will vary from day to day, and depending on the load, I had slightly lower ping this time, so the delay is slightly lower for all games. Starting with local network, CS2, as stated earlier, is still the same as before at about 18 frames or 75 ms. CSGO at 128 ticks does not really change either, as full screen optimizations had bugged during my previous testing and were probably not working, but only on the local server tests. This explains why the click to shot fire delay was slower on a real server. It was a Windows bug. Anyway, the delay was still 9 frames or about 37 milliseconds. And finally, 64 tick CSGO, which had 13 frames of latency or 54 milliseconds. So despite tick rate, CSGO is still faster. What a surprise. It's almost as if literally everyone had noticed that. But all of this was not for nothing. This led to something interesting. The difference between 64 and 128 tick is about 16 milliseconds, and 15.6 milliseconds is the time it takes for a single tick at 64 ticks. But 128 isn't 0. The maximum delay between one tick at 128 and at 64 is 8 milliseconds. That led to me realizing that the delay was about 2.5 ticks between the shots having been fired and the model reacting. At 128 it was about 20 milliseconds and at 64, 37. What about CS2 then? We know the latency is higher, but how many ticks does it take? At 58 milliseconds it's closer to 4 ticks. At 16 milliseconds per tick, this is pretty significant. This isn't very useful information and is more of a different way to visualize the difference, but it's still nice to know. So while we can measure this latency, knowing what causes it is a whole different issue. We have no way to debug and fix this ourselves, and Valve will rarely, if ever, communicate about anything outside of the patch notes. Is this caused by subtick? We can't be sure, but I don't think so. We know that it's something caused by the animations, but is this the cause of it? Well, all we truly know is that what you see is definitely not what you get.